Hey everybody, welcome back to another video on this channel, and today we'll talk about the very common error message, Nuxt Instance Unavailable. I know it can be horrible, but let's see what it means, how to fix it, and let's get rid of it right away. Here we go. Before we dig into that error message and what it means, you'll remember, maybe some of you, the last video, there was a Raffle, and I have to extend the Raffle for yet another week. Why? Because, well, Google and YouTube, there were some problems with showing commands. So yeah, I might have missed a comment or two from one of you because they were not showing up on the page. That means you can comment once again under this video, also on both, that's fine. I will just pick out one entry per person with why you want to go to Vue.conf.us and what nice thing you have built with Vue and or Nuxt already. Just comment down below, and then next week the winner will be drawn for a free ticket for Vue.conf.us. So if that's your chance, if you can travel to the US on May 15th, 16th, 17th, that's the way to go. It would be amazing to meet you there. And yeah, good luck, best of success, and let's jump to the error message now and how all of that is about asynchronous code. And yeah, as I said before, Nuxt Instance Unavailable. I guess some of you have hit that already. Here you see a screenshot of that error message, and we'll see it in a bit already. But first of all, let's figure out how to provoke that error message and then work on how to fix it and understand why it actually happens. As I mentioned, it's a lot about async code. So let's dig into our demo application and break it and then fix it. Our demo application is pretty minimal as usual. We have the Nuxt config with the black-white fix, so just a bit of styling. And then we have our app.vue saying to do here. And to provoke the error message is not that difficult. We need some asynchronous code. So let's start with awaiting some useAsyncData here. And let's just return a new promise, which we will resolve immediately. So let's just put resolve in here and say we resolve with 1. Doesn't matter the value. And after that, we want to call some extra composable, which also needs Nuxt instance, because otherwise you say it's unavailable. And let's say title head is set. So we see it in tab title for sure that it's available. And if we save that right here and we switch to the browser, what will we see? All fine, it works. And actually that's expected because, well, why shouldn't that code work, right? So how can we break it? Well, let's move the whole code over here from script setup in an extra composable. So even though I said, yeah, you know, if you only use it in one component, let's not extract it, inline composables and so on. If you haven't seen the video, it's linked. In this case, let's do that. Let's go to composables and say use break me.ts. And let's say, okay, we export the default async function and call use break me. All right. And then we put the same code we had before in here. We save that, and in app.vue, we just call use break me. All right, and if we save this now and check out the website, what we will see, well, you guessed it already. 500 Nuxt, a composable that requires access to the Nuxt instance was called outside of the plugin Nuxt took Nuxt middleware view setup function. This is probably not Nuxt bug. Well, it's not. Find out more at this. And this whole documentation part explains pretty well what Vue and Nuxt composables are, what this Nuxt instance unavailable means. So it's worth checking that out. But I mean, I'm also here to explain it to you, right? So let's dig into it. And to start with why that error message happens, we should take a look at why exactly this only happens in plain Vue as well. So let me show you one thing. Let's move the things back into script setup, but without a setup. So let's take the content from use break me here, and let's remove that setup here and just use the plain old setup function through the options API, right? Like this. Maybe let's just do this and say we called it async setup. So if we take that code and we would refresh our page, well, we will still see the same error with just a different point to point at. So the problem is somewhat related to script setup because there it seems to work. In other files it doesn't. And once again, to check out why this is the case, let's jump into how Vue handles async composables and code. Then we understand why that works in script setup, but not in the rest. And then we'll fix it. And the best resource for that is the Async with Composition API blog post from core team member of Vue, and Nuxt, Anthony Fu, on his personal website that explains very well how the whole asynchronity works under the hood with Vue. And the main point is that even in Vue, if you have some kind of async function, and then have another composable in your awaited async function, you have a problem because Vue itself needs a component instance, right? So in here, we see that pretty well. Let me zoom that a bit in. So we'll say, like, okay, we have some instance, right? We set the instance as a global variable and we don't want to share that between the requests. So we have to delete it after calling the setup, right? So it's like, okay, all right, get the instance, call setup, and then restore a possible previous one if we want to. So that's how Vue mounts component and how it stores that instance in a global variable. The problem is though, if we have some kind of this, well, this doesn't really work with asynchronity, right? So as you all know, you've probably seen all these like console log examples. Here's another wonderful one showing that, yeah, that won't work. So we got not the result we want here. And this is more or less a design limitation with composables. So it's not like that something is fundamentally broken. It's just something that has to be considered when using composables. That's also why a few people suggest that composables should rarely be async by default. So you can decide if you want to await them or not. And I think it makes sense. But back to the topic here. Let's check out how Vue solves this with script setup. And to be fair, there are lots of solutions that Anthony mentioned here. Once again, you can just say, hey, let's not do that. Let's avoid that. Let's call, for example, all lifecycle hooks and all composables before the async ones. But especially with Nuxt, that's not always easy and possible, especially if you say, okay, there's something depending on something else. You still can do that. That's not necessarily a problem, but that's one option. Another option would be, okay, we can do it as reactive sync. We'll skip over that, but read the blog post. It's really good. And the other option would be, hey, let's explicitly bind the instance. But the problem is that doesn't fully work and it's a bit of like internal API. So yeah, not ideal. But the best suggestion is compile time magic. And as we use script setup mainly, well, that is resolved. And let's see how const post equals await fetch looks like after the compilation. You can also check it in the Vue single file component playground. Link is in the description of the video. So here we see, okay, we have underscore underscore temp, underscore underscore restore. And more or less, this is called with asyncContext function here, with a temp and a restore. We await it, and then we call the restore function to get the instance back. So if you don't fully grasp the code, it's totally fine. You don't have to. It also took me a while. But this will work with script setup because the compiler can do some magic. So that's great, right? But as soon as you use composables yourself, you're not really into script setup, especially nested composables. That doesn't fully work anymore. Same with, well, anything that you extract. So while script setup solves it on top level, going levels deeper, extracting things, composing things will make it a bit more difficult. But there's also a solution there, especially with Nuxt. So let's have a look how that works there. As I mentioned with Nuxt, we have a couple of solutions. So maybe let's change that back here to script setup. Let's maybe a little bigger, not await script setup here, and we await use break me. Okay, so far so good. The error is back as before, and let's fix that. So in here, we have exactly this. We have the await and then the use head. So one way to tackle this is, as Anthony said, let's just, well, move things around. So we could say, let's call useAsyncData first, and then we await the useAsyncData part, and that should work fine. So let's check in the browser if that's the case. And yes, we got it. Of course, because now the async operation comes last. But what if it's different? What if the whole thing depends actually on useAsyncData? So what if we say, okay, you know what? We'll get some data here. So let's say const data equals useAsyncData. And the title should be in here. Let's say data.value. And probably just set data. That's fine. And we resolve it with title set. And also we make sure that it's definitely there. So it might not complain. It still complains because, okay, yeah, we don't know. Let's type it as any to make it a bit happier and see what will happen now. But here the problem is now that we can't really await it anymore, because if we await it, then let's check the browser, things will break again. And that's not really desired. So instead of doing that, we could say, okay, let's return a response here and have useAsyncData. We don't await it. We say, okay, response.data is what we need. That's the same as before, right? And then here we return the response, still given an option to await. So we still awaited in use break me, and now things should work pretty fine in the browser, and they do. Interestingly, that is still not the most preferred approach here. There's still 3 more options to fix that, because also this scenario here, it works. And once again, you have the option. You don't have to keep it async. You can fully decide not to. You can just call it somewhere. So that's pretty cool. And you can even say, hey, use lazy async data if you want to, and then use pending state and so on. So it's pretty nice. But there are a few more things. So let's just jump back to the await here. And let's keep exactly this scenario. Let's say useHead is depending on useAsyncData. So this once again breaks. We've seen that before. And there's another option. There's another option called runWithContext. So the idea is that we have the Nuxt app through useNuxt app. So let's call this. Let's say we have the app here. And now we say, yeah, you know what? To not lose the context, we can run app.runWithContext as long as we have the Nuxt app beforehand. And we just wrap useHead in here around. So in here, this line 6, this useHead will run now with the Nuxt context as wanted and as set. And if we check the browser, things work again, mainly because the context is now not lost anymore. And we also don't have to pass it explicitly to the composable, which would be a bit strange and weird. So the good news, this works fine. There's also one more option called callWithNuxt. It's basically the same idea, but you pass in callWithNuxt, then the Nuxt app, then the function, and then the arguments. Let me quickly show that to you. So instead of runWithContext, you would do callWithNuxt. You would have to import that. It's not auto imported. You would have to pass in the app, useHead, and then an array with arguments. In this case, it's just 1. If we remove this and do some exclamation marks here and refresh the browser, we will see that's also as expected over here. So these are 2 options to resolve that in your code itself to make sure that the whole instance is not lost at all. But what if I tell you there's one more option without changing anything? That would be cool, right? Let's dive into it. And that means let's build everything back as it was before. We had the, you know what, let's just go back. We had the useHead before with straight under it. There we go. We don't need to return anything, and that's it. And just to make sure, once again, in the browser, this breaks as expected. So how we fix it? Well, we can do the following. In our Nuxt app, we can use experimental, and we use asyncContext and set it to true. And this little thing allows us to use an experimental feature called asyncContext. That's what the parameter says too. Enable native asyncContext to be accessible for nested composables. And the best part is, if we now just check the browser, we're good. I didn't change anything else in the code. Let's just quickly check again and write like title set, switch back. It works. Awesome. But wait, first of all, what is this asyncContext? And second of all, why is it not enabled by default? Why is it experimental? Let's check it out. Best resource for this is the pull request with regards to the experimental native asyncContext. And while we dig into how Vue handles the asyncContext topic and not losing it through script setup, we didn't check how Nuxt is doing that. And that's a good point. So Puya is nicely listing here how the whole thing works with Nuxt as well. We have the Vue script setup option here to support async await. Nuxt uses async transform through unContext. Uncontext or unctx is yet another package of un.js. And this also has an asyncContext option and also an async transform option to make sure that in plugins and middleware, everything will be nicely wrapped around, so you don't have to deal with these context issues for you. So that's also what Puya mentions here. But the problem is it's one single level. Because for nested composables, it's a bit trickier, right? So when we see this here, yeah, this will not exactly work. You can have a look. PR is once again linked in the description below. And the problem is that, well, as soon as you go deeper and deeper, no wrapping around will help. Of course, you can still do it manually with Nuxt app run context. So this works, but also just for one level. And well, the only real solution here would be the async context. So this is a feature based on Node's async local storage. And that's an important point. I'll come to that in a bit. And on context to make sure, okay, async context will work out of the box for all nested async composables, which is great. You don't have to transform anything and so on and so on. But the problem is that Node's async storage, well, it's only for Node. It's not necessarily supported in all runtimes. And while on.js, Nuxt, and Nitro and so on, we all try to be runtime agnostic. This is experimental, so it might not work in some production platforms, but in dev it seems fine, which is a bit meh, but luckily wherever Node itself runs, that's a good chance it will work. And the good part is there's a mock for that in unenv, which is also used, so you can definitely try it out, but there's more good news. As mentioned, this whole feature is built based on Node's async local storage, but there is a proposal from TC39 for quite a while already, and the idea is to bring asyncContext as a language primitive in here. And the good thing is also it's on stage 2, so it's not super far away, given that you can start with stage 0, which is any kind of proposal, and stage 1 with like, okay, let's get it slowly going. But it can still mean a couple of years. We don't know yet. So keep track, take a look at asyncContext. And the idea here is that if you have it in JavaScript itself, you don't really need to rely on Node or Deno or any other kind of runtime. It will just work everywhere where JavaScript is supported. And that would be pretty neat. But yeah, the idea is, once again, it's limited for now. There's also Cloudflare workers who also have asyncContext tracking. So there are a few ways to take a look if that simple flipping the switch would work out for you. Especially if you host things not on like an edge or an serverless runtime, there might be good chances, and even serverless with just Node could work. So flip it on, try it against your CI/CD, and I hope you have CI/CD, right? Otherwise, there's a video about testing. At least some basic tests can help. Also catching these, so check it out. And there you go. So let's give a very brief summary. So first of all, this error message is basically related to async code, that the Nuxt instance, the context of it is not available anymore. There is, as I said before, good documentation, which is linked below as well. And I've briefly shown how to provoke that error message, how to prevent it, and we have a couple of ways to deal with it. From not using async await straight away, so from rearranging things to make the composables come before the awaited composable or function, to using callWithNuxt and app.runWithContext from useNuxt app, and last but not least, the experimental asyncContext option. So let me know, have you had that error message? I'm pretty sure you had, because there's so many of that. Let me know how you fixed it, how it worked out, and which option of these will you try, and which worked for you. Let me know in the comments, and as usual, check also the newest Deja Vu episode with Michael and me talking about teleports in Vue and also in Nuxt. So don't forget to check it out. Other than that, questions, suggestions, feedbacks, topics, everything you want down there. Also, thanks a lot to all the channel members, and see you guys and girls next Friday. Talk to you soon. Happy hacking.